morning. This class is for April the 8th, and we are on pages 314 to 316, 314 through 316, and today we are just going to be talking a little bit more about the different types of weaponry that they used during this time. And so if you haven't read your material, go ahead and do that right now. Pause it and then go ahead and start reading, and then we will discuss. Okay, so yesterday, just some kind of review, we talked we talked about the different allies of the war and how Germany had a twofold plan or two-front plan. Do you remember what that was called? The Schieffelin plan. And remember, he wanted to take his army, and Germany wanted to go and capture Paris, and then do an about-face, and then go and take over Russia. However, even though they were able to push back Russia, they had a harder time pushing France back because France fought really, really hard. Not to say that Russia didn't, but France was able to hold its own. And what is it called on the Western Front when nothing else happened, when nothing was accomplished? It was called a stalemate, right? Remember that? Okay, and so we talked about trench warfare and what it was like living in the trenches during that time. Not very nice. Remember, we talked also about how Germany, when it went to invade France, it broke its treaty with Belgium. Belgium said, no, you can't go through our country to get to France, but they did it anyway because they were bullies like that. And we also talked about the Chancellor of Germany at this time was Wilhelm II, and his cousins were the leaders of Britain during this time. So that makes it for a very interesting war because they were on two opposite sides. England was on the Allied side, and Germany was on the central side. Also remember that the reason why England entered the war was because Germany broke its treaty with Belgium, and they probably just thought you couldn't trust Germany. Okay, so remember, the guiding questions are still the same. We're talking about the major turning points of the war. Turning points is when everything shifts in another direction for another team. What would you say for, the Allied powers or the Central powers? And then what is the significance of the nationalism and propaganda in the promotion of a total war? We're going to talk about what total war means today. And then how did industrial production and innovation affect tactic scales and duration of the war? Remember yesterday when we talked about the Battle of Somme and how that only lasted 4 months, but within that 4 months there were 600,000 British soldiers that died in 4 months, and we compared it to the Civil War, and where 650,000 people died in a matter of 4 years. So it was a lot of, it was a lot of more people died in a shorter period of time because of the new technology with weaponry. Okay, so during this time, we talked about trenches and how the trenches were about 6 feet high, and it was a safe place, not really safe, but for them to hide out. If they were to stick their head out, to take a peek to see what's going to happen, they had the chance of getting their heads blown off. That's how bad it was. And so then you had no man's land, which was probably about a mile long. It could be more than a mile too, and it was the most dangerous part of the war because when they went there, there was nothing they could hide behind. It was, you could just get shot. It was really scary time. One of the things that the Germans invented, because it's one thing to get shot with a gun, or they were able to shoot more rounds in a machine gun, or the guns that they used during this war, than they were in the Civil War. That's why so many people, you can get more people with one round of ammunition than in a gun than you could have back during the Civil War. And so you could, just take a bunch down at the same time. One of the other things that the Germans used, and they used what you call poisonous gas, and they would use mustard gas. They would put, use it as kind of like a flamethrower. They would throw it in there, or they would put it in the ammunition. And so when it would go off, it would burn your skin. It would make you cough. Kind of like tear gas. We're used to tear gas. You know what tear gas is, but a little bit more lethal than that. It would burn the skin. It would cause, your eyes to hurt. And so they tended to put these masks on, and it kind of reminds me of what people are using today with the coronavirus. They're kind of scary, the old mask, and I'm going to try, I don't know if you have pictures of it, and I'm going to try to show you a picture. Can you kind of see how, if a guy like that came up to me, I think it would be kind of creepy, but they would wear things like this. And so here's another picture of them in the trenches with their tear gas or their face masks and things. So yeah, it was kind of scary. Another thing that was invented during this time was the airplanes that would go and, and I always think of Snoopy and the Red Baron. In fact, the Red Baron, Baron von Richthofen, was an amazing World War I ace at this time, and he was able to shoot down over 80 planes, and they would do these fightings, and so if you were in a plane like that, like I showed you, I didn't show you the picture, but you think of that, okay? And if you were in one of those and you were able to shoot down more than 5 planes and live, you were called a flying ace. And so we have a lot of, in fact, there's a song with Snoopy and the Red Baron that I used to always play, and I'll go ahead and play it I'll put it in the link. It's just a fun little song that talks about Snoopy fighting the Red Baron, and it's kind of cute, but Snoopy didn't really shoot down the Red Baron. Actually, it was a Canadian man by the name of Roy Arthur. I can't remember. I always get those names because he's got a first name for both, but it was a Canadian flying ace that finally shot him down after Richthofen shot down over 80 planes. And then another innovation, or another thing that the Germans used, was the Zeppelin. Talked about the Zeppelin, and they were able to drop bombs with the Zeppelin. And then England had their own, which was called the blimp. It's kind of like the Zeppelin. So here you have a picture of the blimp. There, I don't know if your history book shows you all these pictures, but I want it. So, and then yesterday we talked about the U-boat, the German submarine U-boat, and how they wanted to control the water. So anybody that was in their vicinity, especially British, because the British had a huge navy, they would just shoot it without warning. It didn't matter if it was a civilian ship or a military ship, they would shoot it. And unrestricted submarine warfare. So the German submarines sank over 6,000 Allied ships during this time. And another thing was propaganda. Propaganda. We use it today, you know, when the Democrats and the Republicans fight against one another, they try to make the other person look bad and them look good. Propaganda was when governments on both sides used every available form of media to maintain support for their sides while demoralizing the enemy. So it could, you know, if we wanted to make Germany look bad, we could make up stories. And sometimes they weren't made up. Sometimes they were true. They, you know, instead of calling, I don't know, I can't even think of an example right now, but it was just lies that sometimes they would use. And sometimes propaganda was used to make people do things too, like join the army. And you should be familiar with this picture. I Want You with Uncle Sam trying to get more people to volunteer for the army in the U.S. Now, of course, when we're talking right now, the U.S. isn't in the war, but eventually it will be, and that's another form of propaganda. One other thing that they used was civil religion. They tried to use religion to guilt people into serving their country. So it's the use of religion to promote the goals of the state. I am a very patriotic person. I love our soldiers and I love the people who fight, but it's not because of my religion. That's just why I am the way I am. It's not because I have to do it. It's not because I believe it's right or wrong in the Bible. That's up to the individual. That's, you know, between you and God, how you feel you should support your country. And I'm not saying that America is perfect. It's not. It makes a lot of mistakes, and it's still going to make mistakes. And there's a lot of things that happen that I don't agree with, especially when you study history and you see how people were treated in the past. But I still believe we have the greatest country, and I'm thankful for being an American. But they use religion to guilt people into joining or promoting, respecting the soldiers and things like that. Not to say that I don't believe that they should respect. Another thing that they tried to get people to do in the States was grow victory gardens. Now, why do you think they wanted to grow victory gardens? Well, they wanted to grow victory gardens because they wanted to grow your own food. If you grew your own food, then they could send the food to the people, to the soldiers or people, you know, that's fighting in the war, or they could save the money. They would do things like meatless Tuesdays, don't eat meat on Tuesdays, or on Sundays, don't use your car, save gas money. It's kind of like now, you know, I haven't spent money on gas in over a month, which is kind of a nice thing, one thing to be thankful for, but going to the grocery store and not having enough food to buy things for, so they would encourage people to grow victory gardens. They would also, there's a picture in your book, encourage people to buy bonds, Liberty bonds. So they were kind of like, you would buy these bonds and it would give money to the government to help fund the war, and then you could trade in the bond later and get your money back with interest. So they encouraged Liberty bonds. Okay? And the definition of total war is what we're talking about, this whole thing right now, is war in which all of a country's resources are devoted to destroying the enemy. War in which there are no limits on targets or the kind of weapons used. So, it didn't matter if you were getting a group of German soldiers and there were civilians and women and children, innocent people there. If you got the majority of the German soldiers, then that was a victory for you. Or not just German, but if German did France or Britain, German bombed England. I know if you've ever seen Narnia, when the kids go and live with their uncle in London during one of the wars, they had to take the kids because of all the raids that the Germans were doing, and had to move the kids away to get them out of London to a safe place. All kinds of weapons. The tank was a big thing that they used. The tank was a British thing, so when they were in the trenches, these tanks couldn't run over these, trenches. Now tanks are a little bit different than what they are now, and they moved at a slower pace, like that, but yet they were still kind of powerful. And we forgot to talk. So that was everything that was happening during this time. There's a lot more that I'm sure I missed, but you can go back and read, and I encourage you to kind of research it. If you're bored and you don't have anything to do, look at all the weapons that were happening, that they used during the World War I. The big picture that I want you to take away from here today is that the industrial production of modern weapons changed how war was fought on land, the air, and sea. Okay, the sea, U-boats, sorry, air, the flying aces, and land, the tanks and the different types of weapons. In World War I, propaganda was used to gain support, whether it was making the enemy look bad or trying to encourage people to support the war by buying bonds, doing victory gardens, meatless Tuesdays, no gas on Sundays, and things. Okay, so that's what we've learned today, and then we'll talk more tomorrow, finishing this section. But I'm going to leave with you an interesting fact, because we're going to talk about Vladimir Lenin. But the mummy of Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, who died in 1924, is still on public display in Moscow, Russia. Gross. I hope you have a good day. I miss you guys. I hope to see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock on Zoom. And I hope you make good choices. Mwah.